Hi, welcome back to the next video snippet from Bedagiskwedawajokzeloumsen, A Dragon's Journey. Once again, if you look in the comments section under this post, you can find the link to Amazon where you can purchase this book in ebook format or as a paperback. I'd do it right away if I were you, but why don't you listen to this first part of chapter 3 and then buy it. That's a good idea to me. Okay, here we go. Beda opened its eyes to the soft shadows of its cave. The glare at the cavern's mouth told the dragon that the sun had risen and a new day had begun hours before. Beda stretched and shook off the last grasping claws of sleepiness and thought about the day ahead. There was no need for the dragon to search for the noble metals today. Yesterday's foraging had been successful and had provided new additions to Beda's collection of abundant opulence. No, the dragon would spend today otherwise occupied. Yesterday had been one of work, and Beda had begun it by flying to the east. Today would be different, with a new direction to the dragon's attention. On this day, the initial direction that the dragon would fly would be to the west. Rucker and Eris had camped on the mountain the night before. They were young and strong and well-provisioned with enough expensive gear and high-tech foodstuffs that they could stay on the mountain and the mountains that surrounded the traveler for a week if they decided to. The traveler and the other peaks in Baxter State Park were challenges to the two, and both of them appreciated a good challenge. They both lived in Boston and had met over watery wine at a much too hip gallery opening 2 years before. The art on the walls was not nearly as attractive as they found each other, and they left together for a just before midnight bite at the coolest, newest restaurant in Beantown, Nibbles. Nibbles had opened the week before and had achieved nearly instantaneous acclaim, not for the flavor and presentation of its comestibles, but for their size. Nothing larger than 1.5 inches by 2 inches was served in the tiny eatery. A spoonful of ceviche, a petit pot de creme, half a deviled egg garnished with a curl of smoked salmon. The foods on the menu were whimsical and delicious, every one. The drinks were as creative and as scrumptious as the food, and all of the offerings were expensive. Rucker and Eris ate, drank, were merry, and left after a couple of hours to spend the rest of the weekend in bed together, ordering in Chinese takeout when they weren't otherwise occupied. Their relationship was almost perfect. Each kept her and his separate apartments. Each took the time to make a date with the other for the times when each wanted the other's company. Each was immersed in a demanding career that was stimulating and exciting, but as dull as a PowerPoint presentation about drying paint to the other. But each of the two was fashionable, well-spoken, and, how did Rucker put it? Oh yes, buff AF. They went everywhere together that a couple should go, were adamantly faithful to each other, despite many offers to the contrary, displayed their affection for each other subtly in public, and loudly and athletically in private, and seemed to have the world on a string, following them around like a round blue puppy. So when Eris and Rucker told their friends and co-workers and families that they had planned an open-ended hiking trek to the northern end of the AT, where Eris and Rucker were asked by many of their friends and co-workers and family members what AT meant, the two simply smiled sweetly and replied in a reverent, almost whisper, Appalachian Trail, and let it go at that. It just meant that these two golden people were off on another bucket list adventure, one that would spawn stories and selfies of another exotic excursion. They had made reservations for a week at South Branch Pond Campground and then for another week at Roaring Brook Campground, planning on conquering the Traveler first, and then, when they had acclimated themselves, Mount Katahdin, itself the northern terminus of the AT. Then Rucker and Eris went shopping at HYOH, a Boston-based hiking and outdoors equipment store that built itself as the place where we make the trail magic. They bought a Big Agnes copper spur 2-person tent, 2 backpacks, a ULA circuit for Rucker, and an Osprey Exos 58 for Eris, just because it was so darn cute. Boots, his and her pairs of Merrill Moab 2 ventilator mids, and rain gear. Eris liked the cute little blue Frog Togs ultralight rain suit, and Rucker the more manly Marmot pre-sip jacket. Together at the store, Eris was excited about what she would wear on their trip, much more so than Rucker. So the two agreed that Eris could do the Amazon.com Prime, shopping for the clothes they would need for their adventure. She found wool socks, 2 pairs each, long pants, synthetic boxers for Rucker, and glacial blue nylon mesh hip bikini briefs for herself, long synthetic underwear bottoms, short and long sleeve synthetic shirts, fleece sweaters, wind shirts, build caps, polypro hats, rain mitts, and polypro glove liners. Since Eris was a much better cook than Rucker, Eris found the food in pots and pans and paraphernalia she wanted to take along: a little wood-burning solo stove, an ever-new titanium pasta pot, some metal forks and spoons, and a couple of the plastic sporks she regularly snagged from a fast foodie lunch places, and a Benchmade serrated locking knife for food or ropes or whatever. Both Eris and Rucker agreed that this camping trip would be one that they would never forget. The two loaded up Rucker's Matador red Audi A4 2-liter turbo and left Boston early in the morning, a few days before Beda's parent left for the West. Rucker drove like he had a get-out-of-jail-free card in his pocket, and there was no such thing as a state policeman, and pulled into the AT Cafe 5 hours later. Rucker and Eris stretched their legs, went into the little eatery, and found a table next to a window looking out at Mount Katahdin itself. Eris chose a cup of lobster bisque, they were in Maine, and a salad of mixed greens, walnuts, sautéed mushrooms, topped with goat cheese and a roasted garlic vinaigrette dressing. Rucker was a much more basic eater. He ordered a Cuban, ham, Swiss cheese, mustard, and pickles on a ciabatta roll, and sweet tea for them both. After lunch, Eris and Rucker got back into the car for the rest of the drive north to Matagammon Gatehouse. They drove north on I-95, exited onto 158, and then bore right onto Route 11 until they came to the little town of Patton. They turned left on 159 as soon as they left the tiny burg, found Shin Pond Road, and 26 twisty, jaw-droppingly beautiful miles later they came to the gatehouse. Rucker paid for their stay in cash, stashed the receipt in his wallet, and went over the directions to South Branch Pond Campground with the park ranger, making sure to make notes on the map that he was given. Another 45 minutes and they were there. Eris and Rucker found a spot at the campground and set up their tent. Somehow the campground was almost deserted, with only a few tents spaced with plenty of elbow room between them. After they had made their camp the way they liked, the two decided to get the lay of the land by taking a walk before dinner. The couple strode leisurely north out of the campground, up Tote Road, to the beginning of the little trail to the ledges. The trail looked like it had once been an old logging road, nice and flat, that took them a mile later to a rock highway of granite slabs where the trail was marked by stone cairns. There was not a soul around. Eris took Rucker's hand and led him to a large pile of rocks off to the left of the trail. She pulled him to her, and they kissed, with no one to watch but an eagle that hovered slowly above them. Later they found their way back to their tent. Eris had worked up an appetite, what with the little hike, and she cooked cacio e pepe in the aluminum pot, skinny pasta, olive oil, salt, pepper, half a cup of Parmesan from one Ziploc bag, and a quarter of a cup of grated pecorino from another Ziploc. Rucker had had the good sense to bring a couple of bottles of red in his old goatskin Bota leather flask. Rucker poured himself half of one of the bottles into the wineskin, and while the pasta cooked, Rucker had way too much fun squirting the wine into his mouth and then showing Eris how to squirt it into hers. After dinner, they cleaned up, made their foodstuffs safe from any bears that might be in the neighborhood, and settled down to watch the fire burn down to its coals before they doused the embers and stirred the ashes. Just about the time that the last of the sunlight had left the sky and the Milky Way was beginning its show, the folks at the next tent on the right brought out a ukulele and a harmonica and played strange and happy songs that made the evening perfect. By the time that Beda's father had left and the dragon child had spent its first day searching for and finding the precious metals that sustained it, Eris and Rucker had hiked more than a few of the trails near their campsite. The next morning, the two humans felt very full of their prowess as hikers and decided to blue blaze the first little side trail that branched off from the main trails they had been hiking. It would be an adventure within their adventure and something to tell everyone about when they returned, safe and sound, to the big city.